get a political perspective on this. Preet Gill is the Shadow Secretary of State for International Development. She's the Labour MP for Birmingham Edgbaston. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
Should we be doing more? The former Prime Minister of Ukraine raging about the impotence of the West. He didn't single out Britain in particular, but thinks the Ukraine has been let down. They want heavy armaments, tanks, planes, a no-fly zone, none of which appears to be forthcoming, Preet Gill.
Well, they have had military assistance, as you know, that they've had various equipment, they've had helmets, and so on and so forth. And I know that the government wants to provide much more. But I think, what he was very clearly saying in that press conference is that he wants the West to do so much more in respect of sanctions, and especially calling those out that are not supporting and that are still clearly engaging in trade and other business opportunities with Russia. But Labour's been really pushing the government, because this isn't about Liz Truss doing a press conference and talking tough and then not following up the actions, because we know that the current sanctions that the government proposed, even with the bills that went through Parliament recently, don't actually cover trust. Banks aren't still designated. You can say everything, but if you want it to have the impact on Putin and the Russian people in the way that you want the sanctions to be effective, then you have got to make sure that the action that you take is swift, and it's going to do exactly that. And the fact that the matter is that some of the ownership thresholds are set way too high by government, and we don't actually have an effective enforcement on some of the existing sanctions.
Hang on,
For example, in terms of the overseas territories and the Crown dependencies. And it isn't just about economic sanctions, though, is it? Because that's what Liz Truss wants us to think and focus on, because this has also got to be about dirty money. We've had the Conservatives in power for 12 years, and they haven't done enough to clean up, the dirty money that's been propping up Russia for so long, and the donations that they've had to their party. So, yes, we've got to take actions. Yes, it's got to hurt Putin, and it's got to impact Russia. Because, of course, at the end of the day, nobody wants to see a protracted war. We need to see, some kind of negotiation taking place for peace.
But hasn't this government actually frozen more in terms of assets in the City of London than the entire EU put together? The whole country, the whole of the EU. I mean, they have frozen a lot of cash. All right, we may not have got so many high-profile oligarchs, but the big money has been frozen.
It has been in retrospect, but don't forget, the government's had such a long time. There's been enough reports come out there telling the government what it needed to do. And of course, even with the bill in terms of making sure that there was transparency about who owns certain properties, giving many people a head start in order to be able to shift their assets and, of course, hide away money isn't actually being tough on sanctions. Now, if you want Putin to really feel that, if you want Russia to feel that, the sanctions have got to be much more swifter, and they've really got to hurt. And of course, we heard as well from the Ukrainian counterpart that even some of the SWIFT payments haven't been really implemented. And as I said, banks have not been as yet designated. So it does matter. The government's got to make sure that the current enforcement powers it has, that it's utilising them, and that we start seeing some of these sanctions taking place. And of course, if we don't be seen to be being tough on this, how do we expect other countries to follow suit? Because they will be looking at what it is that we are saying and what it is that we're doing.
It's ironic, isn't it? Because on Saturday afternoon, didn't get much publicity, a bright red tanker carrying 33,000 tonnes of Russian diesel sailed up the Thames and delivered its cargo in Grays in Essex. That money will go into the Russian exchequer, presumably, and then Putin can use that for war crimes. The real problem is, Preet Gill, we haven't managed to cut off the West's dependency on Russian gas and fuel.
You're absolutely right. I mean, look, the only way that we're going to get any kind of independence is really by investing in kind of clean energy. And that's what Labour's been talking about, investing $225 billion in having a green recovery. But thankfully, we're probably much more less exposed and compared to our European partners who are heavily reliant on fossil fuels, energy and raw materials and other sort of things with Russia. But as you say, I think, we've been exposed to the kind of global gas crisis because really we've had 12 years of a Tory government who sold off our gas storage. We haven't had enough homes being insulated. We haven't invested in renewables and nuclear. And now, today, just yesterday, I think we're hearing that they're going to renege back on onshore wind. I mean, these are things that we must take action. If we want to be independent and not reliant on any regime, then we have got to be investing in renewables, in our industries and creating those jobs and making sure that, we're having some independence, and that's the only way forward.
You can't just blame this lot for the lack of an energy policy. There hasn't been a proper energy strategy in this country for the best part of 30 years.
Yeah, but look, the government has sold off the gas storage. No, but the government has sold the gas storage off. We are in this situation as a result of the actions and the decisions that they have made. We haven't invested in renewables. We don't have an industrial strategy. Businesses are not clear what the longer term vision of this government is, even though Labour has been putting forward very credible proposals about how we make sure we insulate 19 million homes, investing into a green transition, investing into those sectors of buying and selling in Britain. We have a credible plan. It's Labour's plan. The government only needs to do another U-turn as it's used to doing. I think we've had 25 or so in the last 2 years.
Can I ask you about Partygate? You could hardly make this up, could you? The senior civil servant, the first one to be named, fined £50, Helen McNamara. What was her job when she went to a party which broke the rules? She was head of ethics, and it was her karaoke machine they used at the party.
I mean, it's absolutely shocking. And I think, the comments that Rees-Mogg made about how somehow the Prime Minister was given the wrong information, even though he attended 3 events. I think, many people that are listening to some of this and finding out who those people were that were breaking the rules will just be in utter shock. I've been on the doors this weekend, and the very thing that people keep saying to me is, we were following the rules. So many people lost their lives. How is it that the Prime Minister who sets the rules was not complying, and neither were any of his staff? And I think it's really, really concerning that, many of the ministers that we see, they are just shrugging this off as if to say everybody was doing this, everyone was breaking the rules. That is not the point. The point here is the principle of the matter, and that is, if you are setting the rules as the Prime Minister, you must adhere and follow to them. At the end of the day, people lost their lives. This is a very serious situation, and it's not to be, how many people have been saying this to me when I've been discussing it with them. We shouldn't be focused on that. It does matter. It matters the kind of Prime Minister we have. It matters what the country has gone through. It matters that people took sacrifices and took this very, very seriously. So yes, I think it is very concerning.
Can I ask you about a story that was in the Times today? I'm sure you're familiar with it, Preet Gill. It was Labour has been accused of betraying its values after 2 former members of staff, female, who made complaints of sexual harassment, said they were asked to sign confidentiality agreements. Both women refused to sign the non-disclosure agreements. And they were advised by their lawyer, Mark Stevens, who you will know. He said the proposed contracts violated guidance from the Equalities Watchdog and Labour's own policy on non-disclosure agreements. That's not very good, is it?
I think, though, you'll find that this happened, and it predates before Keir Starmer became the leader of the Labour Party. And I think, at the end of the day, he inherited a lot of things that he needed to deal with internally in the party. And of course, this is absolutely not acceptable, and we do need to investigate and look at this. And of course, the EHRC, as you know, undertook an investigation, and Labour has committed to carrying out, those recommendations. And actually, I think he's done a fantastic job in terms of addressing what he had to inherit and finding, and taking us down a new path and making sure the Labour Party takes these sort of allegations very, very seriously.
And if I could just finally, something that did happen on his watch, there was the Defence Secretary got very cross with your colleague, Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, got very cross with your colleague who suggested he'd be happy for Russia to sabotage our nukes. That's your spokesman on peace and disarmament. Very peaceful, but I wouldn't have thought you would want to encourage the Russians to nuke our weapons. Fabian Hamilton, did you catch up with what he said?
I didn't, but I did catch up with what Keir said, and which was absolutely affirming our position on NATO. Let's not forget, Labour is the one that created it. He reasserted so that there is absolutely no ambiguity here, that he is completely, committed to it. So is the Labour Party under him, and that is the direction he's going to take us. So I don't accept those comments being made, but I think Keir has been very, very clear. Actually, we are fully behind NATO and support NATO.
All right, that's Preet Gill, who is the Shadow Secretary of State for International Development, and she's the Labour MP for Birmingham Edgbaston.